Welcome, everybody, to the Dear Jane podcast. We have an exciting episode for you today. Looking forward to a conversation with Jacob Tonglet with Men for Life, and looking forward to hearing about what those guys are doing and the role of men in the pro-life movement. This episode today is sponsored by Cogency Strategic. Scott, tell us a little about Cogency.
All right, here's the deal. So, about 10 to 12 states this year are going to have battles where the other side is going to try to enshrine unlimited abortion into their state constitutions. It's just the beginning. Every state's going to have to deal with this. Cogency Strategic is hyper focused on the pro life issue, the winning these campaigns. The other side is so sophisticated on how they run these campaigns, how they message, the strategy of how they get their voters out, that sort of thing. Cogency Strategic is the pro-life equivalent of that, on how they message, how they reach voters, how they reach pro-life voters. If you want to win your campaign for life, you need to visit with the folks at Cogency Strategic. You can visit them online at cogencystrategic.com.
Thanks, Scott. I happen to live in one of those states, and I'm going with Cogency. So excited about that. Today, like I said, we are having a conversation with Jacob Tonglet. He is with Men for Life, and so we're excited to get to know more about the organization you're with, Jacob, have a conversation around where in the pro-life movement do men fit?
I'm
As I was
so
thinking
happy
about
to be
this,
here.
yeah, go ahead.
I was so happy. I'm so happy to be here today. So thank y'all for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited about it. As the sole female representative in this conversation, I may need you guys to pipe down a little bit. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But it makes me curious, Jacob. We hear that from the pro-choice side, but we even encountered that in the pro-life movement. Where does this idea come from that men don't have a place in the pro-life movement, or men shouldn't be able to speak to this issue?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with just the simple biological fact that children are carried in the woman's body. Now, obviously, we disagree with the pro-choice side in that, like, we believe that men absolutely have a place in this movement, but I think um, the pro-choice side sees it as a woman's issue solely based off the environment in which the child spends the first 9 months of their life. So, yeah.
So, so you work with an organization that's trying to change that perception. Tell us a
Mhm.
little bit about Men for Life, what you guys are doing, and what your role is specifically with them.
Yeah, so absolutely. So Men for Life is just an organization that really is about giving men a voice in this movement, making sure that, simply put, uh, that it takes two to create a child, and so it should require both men and women in this movement to really have a conversation about abortion. Um, so, um, yeah, I mean, it's one of those foundational pieces for us that everyone has a right to a voice in this movement. I mean, when we think about the pro-life movement in general, the whole point is giving the unborn a voice. So when we're talking about giving the unborn a voice, to like sit back and take um the rhetoric of like, well, men don't have a voice, would simply be just completely against what our entire movement from the pro life movement is all about. So, and a lot of times it comes from a place of a lot of men just uh, don't want to get shunned or like, thrown aside, or in modern times, the term canceled, comes to mind. So, a lot of men just feel like they don't have a spot, and a lot of that has to do with legislation. I mean, Planned Parenthood versus Casey in the '90s specifically indicated that men don't have a voice in this movement and don't have a say in what happens in the case of abortion. So our goal is to completely eradicate that misbelief that men shouldn't have a voice.
What do you think, Marcy? I mean, what role can men have in the whole debate?
I think we need men to speak up. We were just having this conversation recently, Scott, you and me, and some other people, about like feminism has kind of ruined stuff for the rest of us. Like, I can't go through an airport, and I used to have people like guys offer to help me lift my carry-on into the overhead bin, and that doesn't happen anymore. But I think men absolutely have a role, and it's a contradiction to me that when the narrative that men are saying feeds and supports the pro-choice narrative, then it's fine for men to have a voice. It's fine for Supreme Court justices to vote in,
Right.
in Roe v. Wade and all be men. But when it comes to the other side in the defense of unborn life, no, you need to shut up and sit
Yeah.
down. And this is a woman's issue. So especially in a day and age where allies are pushed so much, it seems contradictory that we're not allowed to have men as allies in our movement. But I think it's needed. I think women feel isolated in this issue, and like there's a lack of support and maybe even passivity when guys aren't willing to speak up and advocate, because we see this as a human rights issue. So it should be something anyone can speak to.
Mhm.
Yeah, and Jacob doesn't. I think it seems like I've seen research that shows um, men have a significant. I mean, in terms of when the decision for life comes along, men play a significant role in that. If men are supportive, that plays a significant role in the decision for life. Have you seen that before?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we know of just simple statistics to show that about a third of of all abortions performed are because of quote unquote partner related reasons, meaning that one in every three abortions is because either a boyfriend or a father figure or a spouse or whoever male figure in the woman's life is promoting the abortion itself. We also know that roughly 82% of men whose partners had an abortion knew about the procedure ahead of time. And so, there's a lot of factors that go into that. That 82% doesn't necessarily say that all 82% of them agreed with the abortion, but at least knowing about it ahead of time means that they weren't blindsided by it for the most part. Um, so, obviously, um, men have such an important role here because um you know when you're in trauma, when somebody has some kind of trauma going on, they're looking at people closest to them in their life to give them support. And for most of these women, that closest like support system is their spouse, is their boyfriends, is their partner. And so when that partner then doesn't give the support that they're looking for, of course they're looking for any way that they can feel supported and any way that they can feel like they can do this. And when the only people out there saying we support you, we'll take care of you, are the pro choice side, of course they're going to naturally gravitate towards that. And oftentimes it is the abortion clinics, it is the pro choice movement at large telling women that like they're in support. So that's why a lot of times abortions happen, is because they feel more supported by the pro choice side. That's why we, as the pro life side, need to support women, need to support our partners, especially from the men's side, need to support our partners more in terms of choosing life, so that way, we take the responsibility um, of being that support system.
You know who I'm thinking of right now, Marcy, and Jacob, you'll appreciate this. Just thinking about the role men play, and then thinking about the trauma that abortion can cause women, obviously, but then the cost of men. You know who I'm thinking of, Marcy, right now? I wonder if you do. When we were in Washington at the March for Life, and we had a chance to go around, we were talking to people, and I wish I remembered his name. I can't remember his name, But man, we've received a lot of feedback when we had a chance to talk to this older gentleman. And he was there, I think it was his first time at the march. And for the first time in ever, he was coming to a pro-life event. And the reason he was doing that was because he had been he had abortions. His significant other had abortions way back when, and he had been dealing with this pain for the longest time. And he had been living with guilt, and he had been living with all of this for the longest time, and he'd been talking about how it had just been tearing him up for decades. And just hearing him talk, I mean, it just couldn't help but move you. I mean, it was just powerful. And that's you probably have heard things like that. It's probably stories like that you could share with young men to help them understand the role that they play.
Absolutely. And so, actually, on our website, menforlife.org, we have a section devoted to what we call Men Speak Out. Um, and that we're basically doing a video series of men and their stories related to abortion. Right now, we have 2 episodes out. We're working on episode 3 right now, and we're hopefully pretty close to releasing it. But the 2 episodes that are out right now speak to, the stories are very different, but at the same time, very similar in that the first story is from actually a pastor, Pastor Mike. And it's the story of him and his wife together talking about the abortion that they had when they were teenagers, and how that, affected their lives and their, um, trajectory of how they, came into this movement. For a long time, they just didn't talk about it. And it wasn't until maybe like 2, 3 years ago that they really started talking about it and exploring what that really meant. Um, and so, like, hearing in that video, actually, Pastor Mike is sharing his experiences even with his wife for the first time about that. And then our second episode um, is about a man named Sean, and Sean's story, basically, after his girlfriend in college had an abortion, his life completely spiraled, and he ended up in drugs and a whole lot of self-destructive behavior. So what we see from a lot of men is, like, even though that we don't have the same physical traumas that women have through abortion, obviously there's physical traumas that happen to a woman during an abortion, but both men and women have psychological effects of abortion. Um, so number one, it helps the world when men speak out, because more and more men sharing their stories will show more and more what abortion is really doing in this world. Um, Two, I just want to say to any of our listeners out there, if you have a story um, and you would like to share it, please go on our website, menforlife.org, our Men Speak Out section, and there's a place for you to share your story, and we can get your story out there if you feel comfortable sharing. So thank you for that.
Knowing how important a man is to a woman's decision, whether she's going to abort or not, it makes sense to me that the other side would tell men, like, you don't have a voice, and try to
Mhm.
silence that as much as possible. Um, I'm curious to hear more about what you guys do to encourage, like, specific ways that we can encourage men to be more vocal, be more supportive, whether they are the man in that pregnancy
Mhm.
situation, decision making time, or whether they are pro life and they want to know how to be involved. Um, what do you guys recommend? What specific initiatives do you have going on to encourage more men's participation in what we're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, number one, I would say know your resources locally. There's a lot of pregnancy resources out there, and for men to know what their resources are out there, because if whether it's you or somebody in your life that's affected by this issue, um, having that firsthand knowledge of where to go to receive help in a very tangible and like easy way is beyond the most important thing because that's how you take care of somebody in that moment. Number two, knowing your resources for post abortive women and men out there as well, because a lot of times we don't end up engaging in with somebody until after an abortion has already happened. And for a lot of people, healing hasn't happened yet. So knowing the resources where somebody can reach out to get the help that they need, both before and after an abortion occurs, um, is like the way to save lives now and in the future. Number two, like I was talking about with our Men Speak Out movement, that's really our biggest initiative right now is sharing real stories out there of different people who have these experiences. But we also just on a tangible level, um, our one of our biggest things is like protests and counter protests and things like that. So going to March for Lives, giving, um, going to different rallies, whether they be pro life or pro choice rallies, and depending obviously on which one it is the message that you're going with. Um, because people are out there at that moment. Uh, People can hear and see tangibly you in this movement, and like, because a lot of the stuff that we do ends up being online, posting statistics, doing different things, but there's nothing like seeing somebody actually engaging in activism to show somebody that you actually do care. That it's not just somebody, typing behind a screen, but rather that it's somebody out there that really actually cares for the individual person. Um, yeah, and then I just want to share. I think this is a good spot to just say like our mission statement. So our mission is to protect and expand human rights by encouraging men to be informed, active, and purposeful defenders of life. So I love those three steps, right? Informed, like I was talking about, knowing your resources, knowing what's out there. Active, going out to these marches and different things like that, but also purposeful defenders of life. Because um, I love that phrasing because anybody can go out there and just like engage in people and have conversations out there. But if you don't have your whole heart behind it, nothing's really going to happen. Like people really, they need to see how much you care. And a lot of times in this movement, especially as men, that's the biggest drawback that we get is that you don't really care about women, you just want to control women. But the reality is, it's not about control whatsoever. It's because we truly and authentically care about both the woman in front of us and that child in the womb. And we want to protect that both the mother and the child and provide them with all the care and love that we can possibly give them.
I was thinking about all the ways men can be important in this, and we've talked a lot about the role of the boyfriend or the husband in the decision. Um, another important role would be the dad
Hmm.
of a girl who has an unplanned pregnancy. That would be a super important role, I would think.
Yes.
Another one is just a mentor. I know a lot of pregnancy centers are, and I think you referenced it, but just mentoring young men. I think there's certainly a role for that.
Hmm.
So there's just so many different ways you can contribute. One of my theories I was just thinking about why they tell men to zip it and not be involved was because my theory was, well, maybe because men tend to be pro-life. But then I was looking at this recent Knights of Columbus Marist poll, and that turns out not to be the case, at least according to this poll. It says that men, 57% are pro-choice and 42% are pro-life. That surprised me. Because typically, you think, if we're going to stereotype, you typically think, okay, men tend to vote conservative. So anyway, my theory was blown on that. So I have to throw that out. So do you guys typically work with younger men, or I mean, what's your footprint mostly in terms of the folks you deal with?
I mean, ideally, it would be men of all generations. What we tend to see is like two very distinct groups of men in the like the young father,
Hmm.
particularly in like their late 20s, early 30s, like first time, second time, young dads with little kids, and then also like older men, whether they be grandparents, whether they be whatever it might be, middle like older men as well, tend to be like our two demographics that really engage with us the most. I think it makes sense when you consider that younger men, like particularly in their 20s and 30s, having children for the first time. Um, there's just something there that like sparks a desire to want to get involved. And then like older men, I think a lot of times it's from a means of like not necessarily that they made all the mistakes in the world, but like that they know they didn't live a perfect life and to want to give advice to that next generation. So that's kind of the two demographics we see a lot of.
Yeah.
Now, at the same time, like young students, particularly in high school, is kind of the demographic that we really want to engage with a lot right now, because we're we're just seeing a world where um, from a young age, men are kind of dissuaded from being active, um, and that's where the tendencies that they're going to have as fathers really start, the behavior styles, everything like
Mm.
that. So when we engage in particularly like high school men, um I think that's when we see the most fruit in teaching them and educating them. We've given presentations at schools and different things like that. I know me and our executive director even gave a kind of like, I guess, a little talk. It was kind of very informal, but a talk at in Pasadena in California at Caltech. So like we see a whole lot of high school and college age men, um, hopefully getting involved in this movement and becoming that generation that finally stands up and says no more.
I want to read this story to you. I want to get both of your reactions. I had this pulled up. I was remembering this when I mentioned the role of a dad of a girl who gets pregnant. Now, this is off the Focus on the Family website. Um, and I can't, somebody wrote this here at the top. Let me make sure I attribute the writer. This is a piece, by Jess Ford. How about that?
Our friend Jess Ford.
Our friend Jess. Okay. I know a girl, Jordan, who worked at a UPS store in Dallas. A few years ago, Jordan found out she was unexpectedly pregnant and she was overcome with fear and anxiety. When she told her parents, Jordan's father began to express how she was a horrible decision maker and that she would be an awful mother. After this phone call, Jordan was immediately considering abortion. Soon after, she walked into her shift at the UPS store. For some reason, she told a customer that she just found out she was pregnant. The man looked at her, and with great care and intentionality, he said, "I think you're going to be a great mom." As soon as these words left the man's lips, Jordan began to cry. Those words inspired Jordan to choose life. The words of one man, a stranger, had the power to preserve a precious life in danger.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? I mean, that just shows. I mean, well, number one, the role a dad can play.
Yeah.
But that just, I don't know. What's your reaction to that story?
Well, I think people are looking for encouragement, number one. So like the positivity in that voice rather than the negativity and saying, like, you can do this. Oftentimes when we have this dichotomy of like talking about abortion, society is saying like women can't do this all. They can't be an uh, you know, uh, a mom while also holding down a career. Um, and that's so restrictive and
Yeah.
so negative and also so anti-feminism all at the same time. So like just that simple, I don't care if it's from a man, from a woman, whoever, just that simple positivity of saying, you can do this and you got this. And like, reaching out and saying, I'll do whatever I need to help you. Like, how can we work on this together? How can we move the needle forward? But being positive is going to have a bigger impact than throwing it into such a negative connotation.
Yeah, it reinforces a survey I know was done several years ago. I don't remember which organization did it, but the results were they were asking women who had had abortions about their decision and what went into it. Um, and the resounding response was if one person had offered encouragement or had
Hmm.
told me that I could do it or had offered to walk alongside me, I wouldn't have had the abortion. And it just shows,
Mhm.
it's such a contrast too, because you would think the person who has the most influence in that situation that you just read about, Scott, would be her dad. But I think the voice of the stranger had such an influence because it reinforced what she likely already wanted to do, which was to be a mom and to have the baby. Um, but just gave that alternative perspective of, yeah, I think I can be a good mom too.
Yeah.
I don't, whatever my parents think, this is what I want to do. And so even, yeah, I think even just being ready with that encouraging word as we encounter people and have conversations, I think it shows the importance of that too. Yeah. Um, Jacob, as you've been involved in this, I'm curious, as a man, why did you decide to jump into a pro-life movement, especially when so many outside voices are saying, nope, you shouldn't have a voice in this?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. Basically, I got my start in the pro life movement when I was in high school.
Mhm.
And when I was a sophomore in high school, a really good friend of mine who was a year older, he was a junior at the time, started sharing his story of how he was adopted. But it goes deeper than that because his birth parents were actually at an abortion clinic about to abort him when a pro life activist on the sidewalk um, just like saying little things that we do when we're on the sidewalk, like your baby has 10 fingers and 10 toes. And that's really what got her to change her mind. She walked out of the abortion clinic, um, had my friend, and placed him for adoption. And he was adopted by a wonderful family. In fact, that story has been made into a documentary called "I Lived on Parker Avenue," and then ended up becoming a like I guess feature film um, called Life Mark, but with Kurt Cameron and the Kendrick brothers making it and all that kind of stuff. So that story really got me involved in the movement. And then like I stayed involved in the movement through college, and I had a really good friend of mine who um, she was, active in the pro life movement. And she was telling her story about how her mother was an immigrant, um, and like many people had told her to abort. But ultimately, her mom chose life, despite her boyfriend, her parents, or everyone in her life trying to tell her to just abort and end the life and don't worry about it, move on, and have a life. So like knowing two very close personal friends who could have easily been wiped off the face of the earth, no second thoughts. But the fact that they didn't and they're able to tell their stories, just inspired me to like absolutely be involved in this movement. Um, yeah, so that's why I'm involved. And in particular, because I know how often men are discriminated against in this movement and told you don't have a voice, you can't have a voice. Um, that's why, particularly, I got so involved in Men for Life.
That's awesome. That's so important. Where can people find and connect with Men for Life?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of what we do is on our social media. presence. So we have Facebook, Instagram, um, Twitter, or I guess X now, with handles of like at Men for Life or at National Men for Life. Um, and we also have our website, menforlife.org, that people can both reach out to us through those medias, um, or just, share their stories or however. We also have opportunities for people to, we have our contact information and all that kind of stuff on there for people to reach out to us if they want to invite us for presentations or to collab on a project or, anything that you could possibly think of, we're definitely willing to do it. So we just want to be here as a voice in this movement to help whoever needs it whenever they need it.
Very good, Jacob. Thanks for joining us here today on Dear Jane. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you all for having me.
Thanks for listening to Dear Jane. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We've got a new episode every week. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Don't forget to tell your friends about us either. Our producer is Kate Ewell. Our editor is Jacob McCormick. For Marcy Little, I'm Scott Baker. Thanks for listening to Dear Jane.